could have 100% signed something today. We actually had papers ready to be signed, but it just wasn't appropriate. I want to do it right. I'd much rather do it right than do it fast.
All right, it is Thursday, February 28th, and happening right now at 4 a.m. here on the East Coast. A Fox News alert. The president says no deal with North Korea's Kim Jong-un.
The White House revealing the sticking point in their denuclearization talks and why the two nations chose to walk away at the 11th hour.
And we are live in Vietnam with what could happen next. Fox and Friends First continues right now. Big night of breaking news if you're just waking up. A lot has happened since you went to bed. Yeah, good morning. You're watching a special early edition of Fox and Friends First on this Thursday morning. I'm Rob Schmidt.
And I'm Jillian Mealy. Thanks so much for starting your day with us. And let's get right to the news breaking overnight.
Yeah, moments ago, the president boarding Air Force One in Vietnam for that long flight back to Washington, D.C. after announcing no deal with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
Kristen Fisher joins us live from Hanoi as the president stresses talks are not over. But Kristen, he said, I want to do it right, not fast.
That's right. Good morning, Jillian and Rob. Good evening to us here in Vietnam. What an end to this summit. You know, President Trump said sometimes you just have to walk away. And this was one of those times. It sounds like one of the sticking points, the main sticking point, was sanctions. Heading into this summit, it was widely believed that the North Koreans wanted the sanctions lifted on their country before they committed to denuclearization. President Trump, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, no way, that is not going to happen. You have to denuclearize first, then we'll lift the sanctions. They were still hopeful that they would be able to hash out an agreement, but it did not work. I will let President Trump explain for himself how this all broke down. He said this at a press conference just a few moments ago. Listen here.
We just left Chairman Kim. We had a really, I think, a very productive time. We thought, and I thought, and Secretary Pompeo felt that it wasn't a good thing to be signing anything.
So President Trump said that they had the papers ready. They were ready to sign something. In fact, the White House put a signing agreement ceremony on the official schedule. Everybody was waiting for that to happen. It was set to take place at 2 a.m. Eastern time. Then, about an hour before that was supposed to happen, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders came out and said, this is not going to happen. She said, I'm going to let President Trump explain why. And so President Trump and Kim Jong-un, they left the summit at the Metropole Hotel, which is just a few blocks away from here. They left that early. President Trump then went by himself to the JW Marriott where he was staying. That's where the press conference took place. And that's when President Trump walked out and explained what exactly happened. He insists that they parted on good terms. He says that they did make some progress during the talks here in Hanoi. He says that Kim Jong-un committed to no more ballistic missile testing, no more nuclear weapons tests, and that he left the possibility of a third summit on the table. But this summit, the second summit here in Hanoi, ended with no deal. Jillian, Rob?
Yeah, there certainly did seem to be some disappointment in that press conference. Even Mike Pompeo saying, wish we could have gotten more, wish we could have gotten further. Yep. But we'll see what happens now. Kristen, thank you so much.
And let's continue the coverage, and Ed Henry picks it up from here. And Ed, as we just heard, sanctions were the sticking point.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Look, there's one facility we all know about. We knew it was on the table, the Yongbyon nuclear facility. It's something that the U.S. intelligence community has known for a long time. President Trump revealed in that news conference something important, that Kim Jong-un did, in fact, as we anticipated, put that on the table. But the problem, the sticking point is he wanted full relief of all U.S. sanctions in exchange for that. And the president made clear that the U.S. intel community brought to the table table, literally, as they sat there, the fact that Yongbyon is just the tip of the iceberg, that there are other missiles, warheads, other nuclear facilities that the U.S. knew about, some that North Korea admitted to, and some that the U.S., in the words of the president, sort of surprised Kim Jong-un with the fact that they knew about it. So the president said, I'm not going to relieve all of these economic sanctions in exchange for a fraction of his nuclear program being turned over, being dismantled, being denuclearized. So the very bottom line is, I think in the short term, this is obviously going to be read as the president flew all this way here to Vietnam, came home empty-handed, so it's a loss. On the other hand, I think that this president made very clear that in Singapore they made a little progress. Here in Hanoi, they made even more progress. Let's not forget, just a few hours ago, Kim Jong-un really for the first time on camera said, yes, I want to denuclearize. So you keep making progress, you keep getting him on the record, but when he doesn't want to put his whole nuclear program on the table, you don't just say, oh, yes, and sign on to a bad deal. And so I suspect that the president is playing the long game here and says, I'll take the hit on the idea that there's no deal today and get a better deal 3 months, 6 months, 9 months down the road.
Yeah. But, Ed, you know, being the cynic here, I mean, when you listen to that press conference, one of the eye-openers was the president said that he thought that they had surprised Kim Jong-un by their knowledge of their nuclear capabilities in the country, and where they had stuff hidden that they thought was hidden that wasn't hidden. It does make you really question the intentions of Kim Jong-un if he thought that he could pull one over by just closing that one central facility and trying to make some moves in the others.
Rob, you make an important point that reveals a larger truth, which is that, again, despite the deal not happening, in addition to that revelation from the president again said, I trust him. I like Kim Jong-un, on top of the letters they've exchanged before. The president saying at a political rally in the United States a few months ago, we basically fell in love. All of that stuff raising eyebrows about whether he's being too nice to a dictator. I think that when you see the dictator himself saying, oh, I didn't know you knew this much about what I'm secretly doing, you're right, Rob. It raises real questions about whether we can trust this man. But you know what? That makes the president's point even more important, which is I'm not signing on to a bad deal with a guy I may not be able to trust. If I can't trust him, but I can back him into a corner and 6 months from now get a better deal, who cares whether I can trust him? If I can verify it and I can get it in writing that he's going to denuclearize and I can send in independent inspectors 6 months, 9 months, or a year from now, that's better. Because you're right, Rob, they can't trust him today.
All right, Ed Henry, thank you very much, and great coverage overnight when this was all unfolding.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
And let's continue on right now. And joining us live on the ground in Hanoi is former CIA station chief Dan Hoffman, who was just tapped to join President Trump's Intelligence Advisory Board. Thanks for joining us. Not sure if you were listening to what Ed was saying, because I want to bounce off of this idea of trust. And we heard the president say that Kim promised he wouldn't do any more missile testings, and the president says, I believe him. What do you make of that? Is this the president actually having real trust in Kim Jong-un, or do you think this is the president putting on this public display of trust in order to move this forward?
I think we're in a mistrust but verify phase with North Korea right now. The president has made it clear that for negotiations to continue, that North Korea must not test nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. And I think that's kind of a starting point. But, you know, this is kind of the art of no deal. And we've got some good connectivity for negotiations to continue. We need those sanctions to continue. Probably puts a premium on us getting a UN ambassador signed up soon. Ambassador Nikki Haley was so instrumental in ensuring Russia and China participation in those sanctions regime against North Korea, which continues. We need all that to carry on forward as we continue the negotiations.
You know, Dan, being a CIA guy, you have the ability to read people in these situations. I mean, there's two sides to this. Either Kim Jong-un is like the new Gorbachev, who wants to maybe westernize, democratize his country and open it up to the world, or he's just a con man trying to pull one over on the President of the United States. What's your inherent feeling?
My inherent feeling is that Kim Jong-un is like his father and his grandfather, always been trying to exact maximum economic gain while giving up as little as he possibly could. And what President Trump did today was he messaged not only Kim Jong-un but also the international community that we would not make a flawed deal. Yongbyon is not enough. We know about other sites, and I think the president was tangentially empowering his own U.S. intelligence community by emphasizing the important role that they will have in verifying North Korea's adherence to an agreement, if we ever get one, that we can sign.
Dan, we heard the president and Mike Pompeo say that they're both optimistic leaving this summit about talks that will continue going forward. How do you rate your optimism with our relationship in North Korea going forward?
Well, again, I think we've had 2 summits, and we should all understand that, denuclearizing the North Korean peninsula, it's not a straight line negotiation. There's going to be some productive steps forward. There are going to be some setbacks. I think what the president did today and yesterday was emphasize our points going forward, and I think we've made that very clear to the North Koreans what it's going to take for this to go forward, and that there will be no sanctions relief unless North Korea comes to the table with something productive. I'm optimistic about that, but at the end of the day, it would all be quite, speculative on our part. We know that our administration is working hard, but as Ambassador Bolton has said, President Trump can't do more than open the door for Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un's going to have to walk through that door eventually.
So would you consider this summit a success?
I would, for the reasons I said, that we held our ground with North Korea. I think it was important at this stage to demonstrate that we will not sign a flawed deal. It's going to take a real deal for us to agree to something that would actually bring us on the path to denuclearization. We said at the beginning it wouldn't have to be everything all at once, but it's going to have to be a lot more than Kim Jong-un was willing to agree to at this stage.
Did you sense some disappointment from Mike Pompeo specifically in that news conference? It seemed like they really were close there to some kind of an agreement, and they thought they could just maybe get a little bit more, and maybe they had a deal. I mean, I don't think Kim Jong-un thought that we knew what we knew about their facilities.
I didn't sense disappointment from Secretary Pompeo. My best guess would be that Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Bolton and the president game planned this. They probably had a range of options there where potentially North Korea could have agreed to what we wanted. Potentially they could have not given us all that we needed to sign an agreement, and I think that they had probably planned out beforehand that if the deal wasn't right, they were going to walk away. I don't think this was a surprise to anyone on the U.S. side. I think they were probably very well prepared for this.
Hey, Dan, what did you make at the end of that press conference with the president and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo? One of the reporters asked about strengthening sanctions, perhaps, and the president kind of blatantly just said, I don't really want to talk about that. What did you make of that answer?
That's certainly an option. I know the president also talked about the military exercises, which are frozen right now. There may be pressure to bring those back. But right now, I think what we want to do is get some reflections of North Korea's reaction. You know, from my old job at CIA, what we'd be doing now is going into a full-court press, collecting intelligence on how Kim Jong-un viewed the summit, how he interpreted what went down, and then we can make productive steps going forward. But all options, as the president has always said, are on the table.
Okay. All right. Well, it ended earlier and in a different way than we expected. But, Dan, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're coming right back. Stay with us.
Okay, back with the Fox News alert. Right now, President Trump on his way back to the U.S. This just moments ago as he was boarding Air Force One, which is now in the sky after cutting the nuclear summit short by about a couple hours. The president boarding the jet after announcing no deal with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
The president says Kim refused to completely denuclearize and demanded all sanctions be lifted against North Korea. The president did not commit to a third summit, but stressed talks with North Korea are far from over. And we will get back to that news in a second. But for now, we have more.
That's right, because it was a very busy day yesterday. Back in Washington, Michael Cohen will be back on the Hill today for a final day of questioning.
President Trump's former attorney making bombshell accusations, calling the president a liar and a criminal.
Griff Jenkins is live in Washington with how the president has responded to this. Hey, Griff.
Hey, good morning, Robin Jillian. Yeah, the president took a question and responded overseas to the harsh and negative light that his former personal lawyer cast him in. Listen.
He lied a lot, but it was very interesting because he didn't lie about one thing. He said no collusion with the Russian hoax. And I said, I wonder why he didn't just lie about that, too, like he did about everything else. I mean, he lied about so many different things, and I was actually impressed. But the fact is there is no collusion, and I call it the witch hunt. This should never happen to another president. This is so bad for our country.
Now, at the start of that hearing, Cohen, previously convicted for lying to Congress, did not hold back on his character assessment.
I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist. He is a con man, and he is a cheat.
Cohen also said he had no direct evidence of collusion by the president or any of his aides, the central focus of the Mueller investigation. But that did not stop Democratic members from pressing.
Would Mr. Trump, or did he, lie about colluding and coordinating with the Russians at any point during the campaign?
I wouldn't use the word colluding. Was there something odd about the back and forth praise with President Putin? Yes.
Now, one revelation related to the Russia probe, Cohen says he overheard a conversation that could be of interest to investigators.
Mr. Trump put Mr. Stone on the speakerphone. Mr. Stone told Mr. Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Julian Assange, and that Mr. Assange told Mr. Stone that within a couple of days there would be a massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Mr. Stone has rejected that characterization. But meanwhile, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Republican Jim Jordan, says this was all about one thing, and that is Democrats setting things up.
I think this was the first step in the Democrats' crazy impeachment plans. Last week, Tom Steyer, mega donor for the Democrats, was in Jerry Nadler's district organizing a town hall meeting to persuade Mr. Nadler to go ahead and move ahead with impeachment.
Now, as the president flies home, Cohen returns for a third and final day of testimony. Today, behind closed doors, Cohen goes to prison on May 6th. Rob, Jillian?
What a day it was. Thank you, Griff.
All right, 19 minutes after the hour now, President Trump wrapping up the summit with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam. No agreement, and it appears it all ended over sanctions.
Our next guest, a foreign policy expert, explains why no deal is a good deal.
But unlike other efforts to meet with the rogue regime, these talks have not ended.
Here now to break down why other attempts at denuclearization failed is the Vice President for Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation, James Carafano. Thank you for your time again this morning. Look, there's no deal, so some critics will argue that this was not a success. Other people like yourself say no deal is a good deal. What do you make of it?
Yeah, look, so there are four possible outcomes. We could have sealed a deal. We could have at least made substantive progress. The summit could have been a nothing burger, which it was. Or the administration actually could have backtracked and gone back to the old cycle of, you know, rope-a-dope, getting something, give something. Look, I think a nothing burger is a great outcome. Nothing burgers at least have, you know, no carbs and no calories. So so the negotiating keeps going. I think this is a very good outcome. And the U.S. comes away with respect for North Korea. The president likes a tough negotiator. I think he respects that Kim is trying to drive a hard bargain. And I think the U.S. is pleased. And what's most important, because what keeps us safe is not the diplomacy, it's the pressure campaign. And so as long as we keep the pressure campaign, America and its allies are safe, and we can allow the negotiating track to move forward. I think it's a great outcome.
Yeah. And what about the message to the critics of the president that went into this, all speculating that this naive president that doesn't know diplomacy would go in there and sign a bad deal just to get some good news going for his administration, that he would sign something that wouldn't look good? He had this major facility on the table, and he walked away from it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment, because that's what the North Koreans believe. Those folks who talk to North Koreans believe that the problem was Pompeo and that warmonger Bolton. And if they could just get to the president, they could get something, because they believe that rhetoric. Matter of fact, they told the Iranians that that's what they were going to do. And so I think Kim came to Hanoi to test the proposition. And what he walked away with was, no, the critics are idiots. Trump is not just a deal for the sake of a deal. Trump is looking for a serious deal. I think that's but I also think it was smart of Kim to do that. That's what I would have done. Come to Hanoi and test to see if the president really was a serious negotiator, or if he was just somebody who wanted something for, just to say he had something.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because a lot of people say, you can't just trust North Korea. You have to trust but verify. We heard the president say that Kim promised he wouldn't continue. He wouldn't do any more missile testings. For argument's sake, say Kim doesn't keep his word on that, and say we go right back to square one with North Korea, as we were prior to, this administration, and as we were in years prior to this. Other administrations have tried and failed with trying to get, many steps ahead with North Korea. Then what? Then what does the president do?
Well, this is, I think, the importance of the two-track strategy that the U.S. has put in place. It is the pressure campaign that prevents North Korea from being a threat to the United States and its allies. Nuclear deterrence, missile defense, conventional deterrent, heavy sanctioning. It really limits his capacity to threaten us, and it limits his capacity to really build out a substantial nuclear arsenal that could really threaten us. So that's in place. That's the safety blanket. That's the thing that protects us. And it allows the United States to pursue this negotiating track with some degree of confidence, and not from desperation like the past. Because before they were desperate because, like, oh, we got to get a deal. Otherwise, North Koreans are going to get a nuclear weapon, so we do anything to make them happy. But this president's not falling for that trap.
Yeah. The unfortunate news that came from this, though, it really does look like, at least at this point, that Kim Jong-un doesn't have any intention of getting rid of his nuclear arsenal.
I don't know if that's true.
That's not what he wants. Well, I mean, if he's sitting there trying to get rid of, he didn't know what the U.S. intelligence knew, and he certainly didn't want to close down all of his nuclear options. He wanted to get rid of all the sanctions, though.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why the president's there is Kim was testing Trump. Trump is testing Kim. The president feels that Kim might be different, that this is a leader who might actually be willing to do something for his country, and the president's willing to do the negotiating and see if that really happens.
Well, time will tell.
That's fair. That's a good point. Thank you, James, very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, the question now, of course, what happens next? We've had 2 summits. Is the hope of denuclearization on this peninsula dead?
We have live team coverage from Vietnam. Stay right there. Good morning. We are back with a Fox News alert. No deal. President Trump cuts his summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un short.
Lauren Blanchard joins us live from Hanoi, Vietnam. As the president says, sometimes you just got to walk away. Hey, Lauren.
Good morning, Rob, Jillian. Well, it really all came down to sanctions and what North Korea was willing to give up. The president said he wasn't willing to lift those crippling sanctions on North Korea unless they were willing to bring more to the table. Ultimately, both sides walked away with no deal.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that.
Here's how the White House put it. Quote, the two leaders discussed various ways to advance denuclearization and economic-driven concepts. No agreement was reached at this time, but their respective teams look forward to meeting in the future. The president says he walked away from the talks in a, quote, friendly manner, saying North Korea offered to give up their major nuclear facility, Yongbyon, in exchange for lifting the sanctions. But that wasn't good enough for the president to sign an agreement, because North Korea would still have nuclear capabilities in place.
Could have 100% signed something today. We actually had papers ready to be signed, but it just wasn't appropriate. I want to do it right. I'd much rather do it right than do it fast.
And Secretary of State Pompeo said even though both sides have kind of improved their relationship, this today wasn't the outcome either side was hoping for.
We didn't get to something that ultimately made sense for the United States of America. I think Chairman Kim was hopeful that we would. We asked him to do more. He was unprepared to do that, but I'm still optimistic.
And now the president is headed home. Air Force One is wheels up to Washington, D.C. And even though this summit did come to a pretty abrupt end, both sides say they are willing to continue the talks. However, President Trump says he has not committed to a third summit. Rob, Jillian?
All right, Lauren Blanchard, live in Vietnam. Thank you.
All right, now we want to bring in the host of America's Newsroom, Bill Hemmer, live for us in Hanoi this morning. Good to see you, Bill. How you doing?
Yeah, good morning, Rob, Jillian. I'm terrific, thank you.
Yeah, you know, I heard you earlier talking about Kim Jong-un and maybe this idea that he could be the agent of change in North Korea, and that maybe that's something that you could see potentially being the case, even comparing this to what Reagan did with the Soviet Union. Did the way this ended change anything in your opinion?
No, my feeling, Rob, good question, and good morning. Nice to see you all here. It's afternoon, well into the afternoon here in Hanoi, as you know, 12 hours plus in New York. I think, Rob, that what we saw today is more evidence than ever that this is going to be a process that will take years. I was in the room during the press conference with Secretary Pompeo and President Trump. I didn't get a sense from either one that they were really hanging their heads or disappointed. If you listen to the words of the president, what he said was he was willing to give up certain portions of his nuclear program. If that is the case behind closed doors, I don't know if we've ever gotten to that point before. That's the Yongbyon facility north of Pyongyang. It's massive, Rob. It's 387 buildings. It would take months to destroy. But the fact that Chairman Kim perhaps conceded that, not the entire program, but conceded that, moves the ball forward for this team. No announcement. I think the other headlines are no announcement of another summit. I was a little surprised about that. I thought perhaps we might get a break on that, because it is still my sense that Chairman Kim came to Vietnam to do a deal. I think he has moved to that point in this transaction where he's willing to go that far. And as the president said, sometimes you got to be willing to get up and walk away. But I thought those were some of the main headlines that we took away today from Hanoi.
Yeah, Bill, we heard the president say that Kim has a certain vision, and it's not our vision, but that it's closer than it was prior to this summit and the last summit. So what do you think it'll take to get the visions on the same page, if you will?
Yeah, you know, I was thinking, Jillian, during the press conference, trying to get a question in. I did not have the chance. But part of the main reason why we're in Vietnam, not just geographically with how close it is to North Korea, by train 60 hours, we found out this week. But Vietnam has market reforms under a communist-run system that has shown itself to be so profitable for the people of Vietnam. So the question then becomes, do you believe Chairman Kim is willing to take his country and his people in a similar direction? I think the indications are yes, but there's no confirmation of that. If he is willing to go that route, then for him, there's no looking back after Hanoi. And it is my sense that through this process that will likely take years, that we're now on, that we will look back at Singapore and we'll look back at Hanoi and say that was the beginning of something great.
Very interesting.
Well, let's hope so.
We'll see. He might feel that all of that modernization could threaten his regime, and that's what we got to see if he's comfortable with all this. Thank you so much, Bill. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
And we're coming right back. Stay with us.
On his way back to the U.S. after he boarded Air Force One, cutting the nuclear summit short by a couple hours. The president boarding his jet, announcing no deal with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
The president says Kim refused to completely denuclearize and demanded all sanctions be lifted against North Korea. The president did not commit to a third summit, but he did say talks with North Korea are not over. We will get back to that in just a second.
That's right. But first, back here at home in Washington, we should say, Michael Cohen will be back on the Hill today for a final day of questioning.
This after accusing his former boss of lying.
I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
So, do you believe anything he says? Here to weigh in is Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for your time this morning. You know, some folks on the other channels last night, Hans, were saying, look, Republicans wasted so much time today calling Michael Cohen a liar when we already knew this. They weren't defending the president. What do you say to that?
Well, what I say to that is that we heard a lot of unproven accusations yesterday by a proven liar. I'm not sure why Democrats think that Cohen has any credibility. It's not just that he pleaded guilty to lying to Congress. Remember, he also pleaded guilty to lying to the IRS and cheating on his taxes. He pleaded guilty to lying to banks and cheating them in his financial dealings. So, you know, why would anything he say have any credibility? When Cohen accused the president of being a con man and a cheat, I think Cohen may have been actually looking in the mirror and talking about himself.
You know, I mean, the thing is that Republicans and even the president at this morning's press conference, you know, you call him a liar, you say all these things that he did and how he lied through that entire committee meeting, but then you say he told the truth about no collusion. I mean, it's not really fair to cherry pick.
You can't pick and choose, right?
He's either a liar or he's telling the truth, right?
Well, yeah, but look, on the Russian collusion issue, he could easily get caught if he were to start lying about that. Why? Because as of today, Bob Mueller has turned up absolutely no evidence whatsoever of any kind of Russian collusion. All the other matters that he took up, it's just his word against the president. And don't forget, the prosecutors in New York, when he pled guilty, they submitted a sentencing memorandum to the judge which described the character of Michael Cohen. And what they said about him was that he had engaged in a constant pattern of deception in his personal and professional life, and that every time he was confronted with his wrongdoing, he tried to shift the blame to someone else. That's exactly the same pattern that we saw in his testimony yesterday.
And Rob, you made mention of the fact that the president did comment on this morning. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what he had to say when he was asked a question about this from Vietnam.
He called you a liar, a con man, a racist. What's your response to Michael Cohen?
Well, it's incorrect. But I think having a fake hearing like that and having it in the middle of this very important summit is really a terrible thing.
Hans, you know, a lot of people criticize the timing of what happened yesterday in Washington while the summit was going on. What do you make of that?
Well, I really wonder why they're having this hearing in the midst of very important foreign policy activities. Well, look, the bottom line here is that it reminds me of a line from Shakespeare. There was a lot of sound and fury yesterday signifying nothing because, like I said, all of the accusations being made by Cohen are unsupported by any kind of evidence. So I'm not sure why we should believe any of it.
Yeah, and why it really matters if you can't support it with evidence. It's just words, their word versus his word. All right, thank you so much, Hans. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.